This geometrically perfect silhouette has become an absolute symbol. A pentagon captured by satellites, printed in news reports and films. A flawless shape, radiating mathematical precision and total control.
The world is shown a monument that seems as unshakable as the very idea of global military dominance.
But perfect geometry hides a primal fear. Behind the austere facades lies a structure born of panic, haste, and chaos. This is not an elegant architectural design refined over decades. It is a desperate attempt to physically cram a world war under one roof, a construction project without blueprints, a building devouring its own creators, concrete poured over swampy sludge, a system that began to suffocate under its own complexity even before the paint had dried in the offices. This facility is not just a headquarters. It is a massive machine, an apparatus for processing human resources, information, and death. A tool that was created as a temporary solution to a specific crisis, but has permanently mutated into a permanent governing body for the planet.
By the end of this story, it will become clear why the most famous military building on Earth has such a strange shape.
The true price paid to keep this concrete structure from collapsing under its own weight will be revealed, and it will become clear what it really is. Point zero. A time when there is no world power in this place. Only an abandoned airfield, a junkyard, brick factories, and foul-smelling swamps along the riverbank. Summer 1941. War is tearing Europe apart, and although American soldiers have not yet crossed the ocean, the government machinery is already in convulsions. The Army leadership is scattered across 17 different buildings in Washington. Communication is paralyzed. Orders get lost in the bags of couriers stuck in traffic jams. Agencies fiercely compete for telephone lines. The War Department is growing at an alarming rate, hiring thousands of clerks every week. Managing the impending global conflict from this bureaucratic mess is physically impossible. A harsh ultimatum arises. The military command needs a single building, a single space capable of accommodating 40,000 people at once. This figure sounds like organizational madness. The population of a small city must gather at a single location every day to plan the logistics of war. Conventional urban planning solutions don't work. A skyscraper would require a colossal amount of steel, and steel is critically needed by shipyards, for battleships, and by tank factories. Moreover, a towering structure is too vulnerable to air attacks, the threat of which is becoming palpable. Something else is needed. A structure spread out across the ground, low, incredibly wide, capable of accommodating tens of thousands of desks, kilometers of corridors, and hundreds of tons of paper archives. The site is chosen out of desperation. A place called Arlington Farms, a patch of land on the other side of the Potomac.
The territory is tightly squeezed between 5 intersecting highways.
It is an uneven, asymmetrical plot that imposes strict physical constraints. The architects are given a task: to fit as much usable space as possible within these curved boundaries without going beyond them. The solution arises solely from the geometry of the roads. Draftsmen sketch a slanted, jagged pentagon. It is an ugly shape, devoid of harmony, but it fills every last inch of the available land. Then high-level politics intervenes. The president believes that the gigantic building will spoil the view of the historic Arlington National Cemetery. Orders are given to urgently relocate the construction further downstream, to the site of the former slums and the old Hoover Airport. The new site is open and has no road constraints. Here, one could build a perfect square, a circle, or a classic rectangular grid. But there is simply no time for new blueprints. The looming war is breathing down every engineer's neck. The drafters simply smooth out the corners of the old design. The ugly, asymmetrical polygon transforms into a regular, symmetrical pentagon.
The shape that would become a global symbol is born not of a Masonic conspiracy, nor of ancient aesthetics.
It is born of blind submission to a lack of time. A mistake set in concrete. The project is approved in a rush, without a full understanding of exactly how this cyclopean structure will function from the inside. When the budget is approved, the main conflict arises: scale versus resources. A city must be built under one roof in just 16 months. This is a time frame in which it is impossible to erect even a standard large shopping mall in peacetime. Engineering is entirely dictated by the logic of survival. Monolithic reinforced concrete becomes the primary building material. To produce it, there is no need to transport stone from quarries across the country. Sand and gravel are extracted directly from the bed of the Potomac River, literally right under the builder's feet. River sand is mixed with cement in massive quantities. The building takes shape from the very mud on which it stands. About 680,000 tons of loose materials are transformed into a gray, solid mass of walls and floors. Metal is subject to the strictest limits. Instead of thick steel reinforcement, the minimum allowable amount is used.
Passenger elevators are completely abandoned. They represent an unacceptable waste of bronze, high-quality steel, and installation time.
Movement between the 5 floors is facilitated by a system of wide concrete ramps. They are poured with a slight slope so that crowds of clerks can move up and down non-stop, like blood through arteries. The building is designed not as a home for people, but as a mechanism for processing data. At its core are 5 concentric rings connected by 10 radial corridors. It is a rigid hub and spoke layout. Mathematics replaces architecture here. Calculations show that thanks to the ring structure, any point in the gigantic complex can be reached on foot from any other in a maximum of 7 minutes. The human stride becomes the primary unit of spatial measurement. No dead ends. A constant, circular, uninterrupted flow of flesh, paper files, and orders. But this mathematical geometry has a flaw.
The inner rings are completely deprived of sunlight.
To ensure ventilation, empty spaces, light wells, are left between the rings. The building begins to resemble a layered onion. One compromise piles upon another. The interior finish is reduced to a bare, functional minimum. No marble, no bronze in the finishes, no precious woods. Only linoleum, sound-absorbing panels on the ceiling, and oil paint. This is a factory, a plant for the non-stop production of military solutions. And, like any factory, it requires a colossal effort to get it up and running. On September 11, 1941, the first buckets dig into the ground. The earth puts up a desperate fight. The soil is swampy, unstable, and saturated with water. To support hundreds of thousands of tons of concrete, 41,000 concrete piles are driven into the mud. Work continues around the clock, without breaks on weekends. Night shifts are lit by giant floodlights, transforming the construction site into a surreal industrial theater of shadows. 23,000 workers labor in 3 shifts, pushed to the limits of exhaustion. Speed dictates the rhythm, allowing no delays whatsoever. Concrete is poured even in winter, in sub-zero temperatures. To prevent the wet mixture from freezing before hardening, chemicals are generously added to it, and it is heated with huge braziers right at the bottom of the excavation pits. In the summer of 1942, a climatic hell begins. Temperatures in Washington rise to extreme levels.
100% humidity from river vapors turns the excavation pits into suffocating greenhouses.
Workers are dropping like flies from heat stroke. Exhaustion inevitably leads to serious accidents. Scaffolding collapses. Heavy machinery gets stuck fast in the soggy clay. The human body simply isn't built to handle such a grueling pace. Blueprints are created in parallel with construction. Often, engineers on-site outpace architects in their offices. Walls are erected where utilities have not yet been drawn on the blueprints. Pipes and wires are laid on the fly, with engineering plans changing every hour. This is not an organized construction process. It is controlled chaos. The first section of the building is commissioned at a time when the rest of the complex is still just a bare concrete skeleton. In the spring of 1942, the first employees begin moving in. They work amid the deafening, non-stop roar of jackhammers behind the wall. Fine concrete dust covers the black typewriters with a thick gray layer. Open windows draw in the acrid exhaust fumes from heavy construction equipment. There are no signs yet in the endless corridors, and new employees literally get lost in the identical gray labyrinths. Couriers rack up dozens of kilometers per shift, searching for the right offices.
Rumors begin to circulate about people who couldn't find their way out for days on end.
The space begins to break people's minds. Identical doors, the same yellow linoleum, uniform artificial light. The monotony turns into an instrument of involuntary torture. In January 1943, exactly 16 months after the foundation was laid, the building was officially declared complete. The speed of construction bordered on an industrial miracle. The world was shown the unquestionable triumph of American engineering. The largest administrative building in the world had been erected in a time frame that no one had believed possible. But this was merely a facade of completion. The concrete deep within the walls was still wet. The enormous flat roof was already beginning to leak at the joints. The steam heating systems are out of balance. The gigantic structure is alive. It has been put into operation. But it was born prematurely, concealing structural defects in every joint. The original government plan envisioned a remarkable future for this gigantic structure. Architects and politicians sincerely believed that after victory in the war, this monster would be immediately dismantled. The vast spaces were planned to be transformed into a quiet repository for endless government archives. Another humanitarian use for the concrete fortress was also considered. The government wanted to open a massive veterans hospital there for wounded soldiers. It was assumed that the military departments would quickly vacate these walls after the enemy's surrender. The generals were to return to their old, compact headquarters in the historic center of the capital. This entire incredible structure was viewed exclusively as a crude, disposable tool. It was created to solve one specific overarching task: the rapid defeat of the Axis powers. The building was constructed for a very specific and extremely brief historical era. But the victorious year of 1945 does not bring the world the relief it had hoped for. The military victory over fascism rapidly turns into the beginning of a new era of global tension. An even larger scale and more frightening ideological confrontation begins between former allies. The world is inexorably split in two by the Iron Curtain. The American global military now demands constant and very strict centralized control. The military department ultimately does not simply remain in its former location. It literally becomes firmly embedded in the thick Washington concrete. A temporary working shelter becomes the absolutely indispensable core of new military power. The building officially becomes the permanent headquarters of the Department of Defense. It is from here that the political will for half of our planet is now dictated. The Pentagon begins a painful and lengthy process of adapting to peacetime conditions. However, This peacetime turns out to be far more tense than the war that has just ended. Life inside the complex radically changes its usual rhythm. Soda machines, bank branches, and even jewelry stores appear in the endless corridors. Ordinary civilian barber shops, pharmacies, and large bookstores open. The building rapidly mutates into a completely autonomous and self-contained city-state. Tens of thousands of people now commute here daily by bus and private car. For their convenience, massive asphalt parking lots are being built around the complex. These gray fields are mercilessly scorching many hectares of fertile land around the river. The building even acquires its own unique zip code and a private armed police force. On the surface, all of this looks like a perfectly tuned and flawless social mechanism. Announcers in patriotic newsreels cheerfully tell viewers about the complex's engineering marvels. They showcase the famous pneumatic mail system, capable of delivering secret orders in a matter of seconds. Journalists marvel at the complex's gigantic dining halls. These kitchens serve tens of thousands of meals per hour without the slightest delay. But inside, this much-praised ring-shaped logic begins to suffer regular and very painful breakdowns. The structure was created purely for the simple paperwork of the early 1940s. Now it faces the completely unstoppable growth of the modern bureaucratic apparatus. The internal workspace begins to become critically and uncontrollably crowded. People are simply getting cramped within these concrete walls. Spacious halls are mercilessly divided by thin plywood partitions into very small work areas. Those very stuffy office cubicles, devoid of daylight, are appearing. Wide corridors are rapidly narrowing due to the endless metal cabinets installed along the walls. Millions of new secret documents and reports are stored in these safes. There is physically much less fresh air in the rooms. The old ventilation system completely fails to cope with its task. It was designed for a strictly defined volume of oxygen and heat from human bodies. With the new population density, this fragile climatic balance instantly collapsed. The air in the offices stagnates heavily, causing employees constant migraines. A persistent, chronic dampness accumulates in the lower, windowless levels of the building. The building was originally designed by engineers for a single, swift, and decisive victory. But in the end, it finds itself permanently trapped in a completely different battle. It is a long and exhausting war of attrition against its own inevitable physical deterioration. The mechanism for commanding the army begins to slowly crumble from within. A completely new historical era of global development begins. This is a tense era of the split atom and complex computing electronics. Military conflicts permanently shift from the realm of simple paper frontline maps into a different reality. The era of global nuclear deterrence, underwater sonar, and precise satellite reconnaissance begins. The basic functions of the military facility itself are radically changing. A gigantic building is now required to do more than simply house thousands of people at their desks. It must become the enormous, incredibly secure electronic brain of the entire country. The very first electronic computers begin to be brought en masse into the spacious offices. These are incredibly heavy and scorching metal cabinets reaching up to the ceiling. They require a special microclimate and powerful, constant cooling. Powering these voracious machines requires a massive and uninterrupted supply of electricity. Workers begin pulling new, thick cables through the old and very cramped ventilation shafts. Dozens and then hundreds of kilometers of heavy copper wires pierce the structure of the complex. It is like implanting a new nervous system into an old body. The infrastructure from the 1940s is beginning to crack at the seams. Meanwhile, the very first, old wiring remains in its original place. Its insulation has become very brittle and has long since begun to crumble into dust. Dismantling it was too expensive and complicated. These cables are simply left behind the new drop ceilings for the sake of saving time. The walls of the complex are rapidly becoming overgrown with dead communication lines, like dangerous malignant tumors. New, powerful electronics generate a colossal amount of excess and dangerous heat. The building now has an urgent, vital need for massive industrial air conditioners. Heavy-duty cooling units and compressors are installed directly on the Pentagon's flat roof. This adds a critical weight load to the old concrete slabs. The architects never designed the roof to support such incredible masses of equipment. The gigantic building begins to vibrate slightly and unpleasantly. This is caused by the constant, round-the-clock operation of dozens of compressors and powerful backup diesel generators. Meanwhile, in the deepest, dampest basements, protected command posts are being hastily constructed. They are being built in case of a direct nuclear strike on the capital. To this end, the dilapidated historic concrete is being reinforced with thick additional steel plates. The onset of the Cold War and national security demand absolute secrecy. Inside the previously open complex, isolated zones with special access protocols are rapidly emerging. The wide radial corridors were once designed for the unimpeded passage of personnel. Now they are completely sealed off by heavy armored doors and sophisticated electronic locks. Freedom of movement disappears forever. That very ideal logistics of 7-minute access to any office is finally destroyed. The main reason for this is total state paranoia and fear of espionage. Just to get into the adjacent inner ring of the building, clerks now have to make a long detour past security checkpoints. The ministry's single living organism is fracturing into closed segments. Departments become suspicious of one another and hide behind steel safes. In addition to the enormous electronic weight of the technology, a completely different burden falls on the building. It is the incredibly heavy and oppressive symbolic weight of the world's policemen. During the long Vietnam War, this complex becomes the main target for hundreds of thousands of protesting citizens. A tight ring of aggressive protesters lays a veritable siege to the concrete complex. The crowd even attempts to symbolically lift this colossus into the air with the power of their minds as a sign of protest. Following such mass unrest, the building is hastily surrounded by new, substantial physical barriers. The entire outer perimeter of the complex is reinforced multiple times with concrete blocks and fences. The original bright architecture of business openness is irrevocably consigned to the past. It is replaced by the gloomy architecture of a besieged fortress, bristling with weapons. The military department is cutting itself off from its own people. Meanwhile, deep within the walls, physical decay is steadily advancing. The old steel pipes of the city's heating system were carelessly embedded directly into the concrete during the rush of the 1940s. Now, they are beginning to burst en masse due to years of corrosion. The rusted metal is no longer able to withstand the internal pressure of the hot water. Accidents have become a routine occurrence for local plumbers. Periodically, this scalding hot and incredibly rusty water bursts out. It regularly floods top-secret archives and expensive data centers. Valuable historical documents are turned into a soggy mess because of a simple rotten pipe. Repair crews have to work around the clock just to try to salvage the situation. They patch up some holes, only for new ones to appear in the adjacent wing. Another terrifying hidden threat is old construction asbestos. It was used liberally and everywhere during the rush to build as a very cheap insulator and fireproofing material. Decades later, this material begins to dry out relentlessly and crumble into fine particles. A completely invisible but deadly toxic, carcinogenic dust forms. This toxic suspension begins to circulate freely through all the closed circuits of the old ventilation system. It penetrates unhindered into the most protected and secret bunkers of the complex. Toxic particles settle daily in the lungs of ordinary clerks and high-ranking four-star generals alike. The invisible enemy of the Cold War turned out to be embedded right in the foundation of the country's main military building. By the early 1990s, the building's impeccable exterior hid a catastrophic failure of its infrastructure. The building had completely ceased to fulfill its basic functions. It was no longer an effective headquarters. It had become a dangerous zone of technical disaster. The internal electrical circuits were so overloaded that turning on an extra heater in one office could completely cut power to a critical server room in another wing. Constant micro-short circuits caused regular smoldering fires in the ceilings. The blind spots above the suspended ceilings are crammed with such an incredible amount of abandoned cable that their combined weight threatens physical collapse. Decades of thick dust accumulate there, creating an ideal explosive environment. Stagnant water constantly pools in the basements. The cheap river sand used to make the concrete in 1941 lacks proper waterproofing. Dampness is inevitably corroding the steel reinforcing bars from the inside. Load-bearing supports are covered with a dangerous network of microcracks. The gloomy corridors are teeming with rats and colonies of cockroaches. Standard pest control doesn't work because the chemicals simply cannot penetrate the endless voids of the old, dilapidated structure. Biological life is stubbornly reclaiming space from the military. Every time a severe storm hits Washington, the roof springs massive leaks. In the offices of high-ranking officials, thick plastic sheeting is routinely laid over desks to protect maps and classified documents from the dirty rain. Sudden power outages become an exhausting routine. Once, due to a simple burst pipe, the main government communications hub completely fails. For several hours, control of the nuclear arsenal is transferred to backup, extremely unstable lines. The highly complex mechanism begins to malfunction. It becomes absolutely clear to the architects and engineers. If they do not intervene immediately, the building will simply burn out from the inside due to a single accidental spark or collapse in on itself due to the fatigue of aging materials. Politicians face a difficult, humiliating choice: demolishing the entire complex and building a new high-tech hub would be significantly cheaper and more logical. But this symbol absolutely cannot be demolished. The Pentagon has become synonymous with an invincible army. To destroy it would be to broadcast weakness to the world. An unprecedentedly difficult decision is made. A global program of phased reconstruction begins, given the ambitious name Project Phoenix. The engineering plan is to rebuild the building section by section without halting its operations for even a single second. It is the most complex open-heart surgery imaginable, performed while the patient runs an obstacle course. One of the 5 rings, or wedges, is completely taken offline and isolated. Tens of thousands of people are temporarily relocated to containers on the lawns. A ruthless, total dismantling of the interior down to the foundation begins. The large-scale renovation quickly reveals a horrifying internal scene. When workers remove the old wall cladding of the first wedge, they see with their own eyes the true legacy of the 1941 panic. The hollow voids are filled with construction debris, empty bottles, crumpled wartime newspapers, forgotten tools, and cigarette butts from the original builders. The concrete crumbles right in their hands. What had held up the heavy roof for half a century turned out to be frozen haste. Special engineering crews are carefully removing thousands of tons of toxic asbestos. They are cutting out hundreds of kilometers of dead, de-energized cables. The builders are leaving behind only a bare, stripped-to-the-bone gray concrete skeleton. Saving the system requires radical physical reinforcement. The historic structure must be discreetly transformed into a modern, impenetrable bunker. The strongest Kevlar mesh is woven into the old, fragile walls. It is designed to contain deadly shrapnel in the event of an explosion. New windows are installed in the openings. Heavy, armored, double-paned glass, 5 centimeters thick, each weighing a ton. Modern fiber optic cables are laid beneath the floors, reliably protected from electromagnetic pulses. Independent, self-sufficient life support systems are built for each renovated sector. The reconstruction of just the first wedge alone takes several long years and takes a massive toll on the state budget. The price of salvation turns out to be colossal. But the newly implemented structure seems absolutely invulnerable. The renovated wedge gleams with fresh paint and resonates with hidden metal. September 11, 2001, marks the date that becomes the most brutal test of this new fragility. A passenger airliner, hijacked by terrorists and turned into a guided missile, crashes into the building at a speed of over 800 kilometers per hour. Thousands of tons of red-hot metal and jet fuel crash into the facade with a deafening roar. With mathematical precision, the impact strikes the newly renovated Wing 1, the very section that had just been completed after a comprehensive, grueling renovation. The price of the recent rescue manifests itself in a paradoxical way. Integrated Kevlar meshes and heavy armored windows absorb the monstrous kinetic energy. They prevent the facade from crumbling to dust instantly. The old concrete supports, carefully reinforced with steel, hold the enormous weight of the upper floors with their last ounce of strength for 30 minutes. This tiny window of time is enough for most people to escape the burning inferno. If the plane had struck the old, unrenovated section, the flimsy building would have collapsed like a house of cards in seconds, burying thousands of lives. Modern engineering withstood the impact just long enough to mitigate the inevitable consequences. Nevertheless, the damage inflicted is catastrophic. Fire breaks through any barriers. The roof in the direct impact zone still collapses downward in a heap of debris. The main landmark sustains a deep, through and through gaping wound. After the terrorist attack, there is no return to the carefree state of the past. The reconstruction of the remaining damaged and old sectors turns into an urgent military operation with unlimited funding. Now, it is not just a matter of repairing worn-out water supply networks. It is an aggressive transformation of a historic building into a closed fortress with paranoid-level security. The facade's exterior is painstakingly restored with frightening precision. The same limestone from the same quarries is used, and the same strict geometry of the windows is maintained. From the outside, it seems as though the terrible wound has healed without a single scar. But inside, the old shell no longer exists. The internal layout has been radically redrawn. Reinforced, thick floor slabs devour precious space. Heavy armored doors turn every corridor into an airtight airlock of a combat submarine. The building has finally lost its original essence, the logic of a fast-paced pedestrian city. Every movement is now dictated by impersonal security protocols. Access is fragmented into hundreds of invisible levels of secrecy. Beneath the ground, new levels are secretly expanding, never mentioned in official press releases. Vital communication hubs are buried deep within the bedrock, far from the surface and any potential airstrikes. Infrastructure is now duplicated at least 3 times over. Water supply, purification of chemically contaminated air, independent power generation, the facility can exist autonomously for months, completely cut off from the burning world outside. But this heavy armor creates a new, invisible vulnerability. The complexity of the implemented digital systems reaches the limits of human control. Tens of thousands of sensors, cameras, and servers require non-stop software maintenance. The physical wear and tear of old concrete, has been replaced by a constant cyber threat. Now the complex's most vulnerable spot is not the foundation in the damp mud, but a breach in the program code. The load on the building is once again changing its nature. Before, it was the weight of tens of thousands of human bodies and tons of paper. Now, it is the physical weight of data. Trillions of bytes of information flow through fiber optics every second, generating enormous amounts of heat and requiring ever more cooling and space. The building has physically survived, but it was saved at the cost of a complete transformation from an administrative office into a heavy machine of survival. The gaze rises once more high above the Potomac River. A smooth, monolithic Pentagon lies on the ground like a giant concrete seal. Its perfect geometry still seamlessly conveys a signal of absolute, unshakable power. But this is merely a stone mask stretched over a constantly mutating internal mechanism. All that remains of that hastily constructed, mud-built structure, erected in 16 months, is its external form. A contour absurdly dictated by old highways that have long since ceased to exist. The system has completely swallowed its own framework. To maintain the visual illusion of control over the world, it was necessary to transform a temporary refuge into the most expensive, heavy, and complex trap in the history of military engineering. Ambitions of global presence have a real physical density. They constantly press down on the floors, demand inexhaustible energy, and dictate brutal engineering compromises. Behind any monumental stability always lies wear and tear, and frantic, non-stop repairs. This Pentagon stands not because of any original architectural genius. It stands only because the gigantic apparatus of military coercion simply cannot afford to stop. The form has been preserved, but its essence is an eternal, hidden conflict between matter and scale.